Yeah, okay, we got the message.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Senior Center Without Walls series funded by the United Way. I'm Lori Stamen, manager of the Metchosin Seniors Resource Center. And we've invited Shirley Daventry French and her daughter Rachel French de Mejiain to talk about Shirley's life. A little bit about Shirley and Rachel. Shirley, who's 90 years young, has lived in Metchosin since 1972. And while raising her 3 children here, she engaged on a fascinating and fulfilling career in yoga, which led her to studying under several world-renowned yogis, some of whom graced our beautiful Metchosin shores. Shirley has taught yoga for over 50 years, both locally and all over the world. Shirley's also the founder and matriarch of the Iyengar Yoga Center of Victoria and remains actively engaged with them to this day. And Rachel moved here with her parents when she was 11. After she graduated, Rachel attended UBC nursing school and met a Colombian who she married, and they raised a family in Victoria. Rachel nursed and then taught for 30 years, and she just recently retired and moved back to her Metchosin family home, and they live on the same property with her parents, which has actually allowed her mom and dad to remain in their home here in the community. Now, before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. That I'm recording this talk, and we're going to post it on our Metchosin Seniors YouTube channel. And please keep your microphone muted unless you have a question, just to keep down the background noise. And you can ask questions by unmuting yourself or typing it in the chat box, and I'll read it. So over to you, Shirley and Rachel.
Well, hi, we're very, very happy to be here and share Mom's journey with you. I thought we probably should start, where you were born and how you got here, and then onward. It is all part of it. Of the journey.
Well, I've heard 1 or 2 accents that don't come from this part of the world already, and you can probably tell that mine is English. I grew up in London, and I was in London during most of the Second World War, not all of it. I'm one of the evacuees that you hear about from time to time. And so it's been an interesting time for me with this Ukrainian war because of the similarities with what happened in the 30s, if those of you who are familiar with the history. And it's not very reassuring, but this is what we're living again. And I once wrote, I do quite a bit of writing, and I once wrote an article about being born in the Depression and growing up in a world war. And and here at the end of my life, facing many challenges, but when will the good times begin? So I figure this is it. This is it. And so I had no thoughts of immigrating in the early years of my life or my adult life, other than to France. I love France. I love everything French. I love French food, and I shouldn't really say it when I'm talking about yoga, but French wine. And so I thought of Europe, and I met my husband in London. We actually went to the same high school and had a very on-off romance till he finished medical school, and eventually we decided it was inevitable and got married. And then we weren't thinking of coming to Canada or immigrating, and we went to start a family in England, but I miscarried this first pregnancy. And then he started talking about immigrating. And I thought he was doing it just to distract me from what had happened. And partly he was, but also he was getting serious about Canada because he was working with a Canadian doctor in a hospital in England. And they talked about it on nights when they were there, working together. And so eventually, it was quite close to getting on a boat and crossing the Atlantic, that I realized he was serious. And so we came to Canada. And I grew up with a father who was he was a press photographer, so he had traveled all over the world. And he talked about these different countries. So I was curious about the world. So I didn't mind coming to Canada. And we came here and crossed Canada by train to get an idea of its size, and then came to Victoria. And the moment we stepped off the ferry from Vancouver, my husband knew he wanted to stay here. It took me about 11 years to settle down after that. And
I have a story that they told when I was growing up, that when they arrived, they went on a tour, and I had thought of BC. I thought it was this grand tour of BC, and that Mom had come back from this tour and said to my dad, "We live in Victoria or Vancouver, or I'm going home." It turns out the grand tour was from Vancouver to Hope and back.
So anyway, my husband was looking where to start a practice. He was a family doctor and decided to start his practice in Esquimalt. And as was the fashion in those days, there's letters every day in the papers about what's happened to all the family doctors. One of the things that's happened is that wives no longer work unpaid to set up their husband's practice. I'm not a nurse. I've never wanted to be a nurse, and he had a nurse in his office, but I did everything else about his practice. We had the phone in our home. We answered it day and night. And it was very much an old-fashioned family practice and doesn't exist today. And I'm sure never will again, just like that, which is sad for all of us who are growing old now or grown old. So that was the thing. We were here, and then I wanted to have babies, and I had 3 babies very quickly.
I'm one of those.
Yes, Rachel was the first, and then it was about, how old were you when I started yoga?
Well, the first memories I have before they got into yoga was encounter groups in Duncan.
That's right.
They started exploring, and I was probably about 11, somewhere around there, around the time we moved here to Metchosin, somewhere in that era. So the very early 70s, 1970, somewhere around there.
That was an era of unrest because of the Vietnam War, and because many Americans, draft dodgers and others, were coming to Victoria. And personally, I thought it was a good thing. It livened Victoria up a little bit, and so became a more vibrant city in some ways. And but I was not happy. When the children started going to school, and I thought, what about me, really? And I thrashed around a bit. I did a lot of sports. I was quite athletic and did a lot of sports. At one time, I'll give you a little quote about being athletic. Rachel was talking about the outdoors, the Canadian outdoors. And I think it was with my granddaughter and some other young people. And I joined the conversation and said, well, I was outdoorsy when I was young. And she looked at me with a look of real surprise on her face and said, I wouldn't call you outdoorsy. I would call you athletic. So I said to her, if you grew up in London and you spent all your time outdoors in the local park, swimming in their swimming pool, playing tennis in their tennis courts, running around and throwing balls on their grass areas, rowing boats on the lake, you were outdoorsy. So we established.
Well, I know, but Mom's definition of the wilderness is Whitty's Lagoon. So she says she lives on the edge of the wilderness.
So of course I say this now, it's become a sort of one of these archaic quotes that in the family. But I had no thoughts of Metchosin in the beginning, except we came out here to Whitty's Beach for picnics a weekend and loved it and enjoyed it and looked around a bit. And then with all the ferment that went on about the wars then, and as you know, at one time we came close to an atomic war with the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things. And one of the things that was being said a lot was that we were going to run out of food, and it was important to grow your own food. But we lived on 3/4 of an acre in Esquimalt, in a nice house, a nice property, but we needed an extra bedroom. And we thought about building on, and then we thought we have no real area to grow much, few flowers like we did grow there.
It was a rock. It was a big rock we lived on, essentially.
And so we started thinking of moving, and then Metchosin came into the picture because of the picnics on the beach, but also a friend of ours, a psychiatrist, had opened a school or a residence for troubled children in Metchosin at Deer Leap, and on what's the name?
Pears Road. It
Pears
was on
Road.
Pears Road, the big house up
And
Pears Road.
he asked my husband to be their practitioner, medical practitioner. So there was some involvement with Metchosin, and we came out here, we looked around. And we even thought of communal housing at one time with some friends, but none of us was really ready for that concept. And everybody else withdrew from it. And then Derek and I continued to have a look around Metchosin, and we liked it. So we started thinking, well, we could grow some food if we had a little bit more property, and we needed another bedroom, so we would look at things. And one summer we had camped to Cortes Island, and when we came back to Esquimalt, it seemed really busy after Cortes Island. So and Rachel and I had an argument over something. Somebody had been in her bedroom and interfered with her
My
things.
yes, my things, dolls and toys, and
It was an Iranian doctor who had come here
Yeah.
to do a load
And their
for
kids
my
had
husband.
rearranged things in some manner.
So she was upset. I was tired after the drive, and we had a big argument, and I couldn't sleep. So I looked at the paper and saw an advertisement for a house in Metchosin. And it was waterfront, and it was out here near Whitty's Lagoon. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And when my husband woke up the next day, I said to him, let's go and look at it. So we came out and we looked at the house. It was on Duke Road on the waterfront, but it needed a lot of money to renovate, to make it livable. So, and we didn't have lots of cash lying around. So we thought, well, that's not going to work. And we just looked around, and the house we're in now on Olympic View Drive had a for sale sign on it and an open house sign on it that day. And we came in and we looked at the house, which also needed a bit of work, but not quite so much. And we thought that this is an incredible place. We just right away loved this property. And it was a feeling, not that it was so beautiful at the time, but it was a feeling about living here. And we contained our enthusiasm till we'd left the real estate person. And in the car, when we both got back in the car, we said, we've got to have that house. And it was quite irrational. It wasn't a logically thought out decision, but it's been a wonderful decision.
Yes, and that's why I'm back here, to keep it going for another generation.
Yeah, but Rachel always
Yeah.
said when she was a child, she was going to come back when she wanted to see the world too. And she went off to England at 17 and lived there for a little while. But she said she was going to come back to Metchosin and raise dogs. Well, she's not raised one. She is
Yes,
raising.
I am raising breed dogs. I had this fantasy I was going to be a Labrador Retriever breeder.
So we started living here. But as all that was enough ferment for many people, but for my children, particularly at the time. But I was not happy still. I was very restless, and I had started a little yoga in Esquimalt before we left. About 2 years of study, and I'd been to an ashram that I heard about, where a teacher called Swami Radha came to Victoria and gave a talk on yoga.
I have a little picture of her here, visual aids. Don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
That is she in her heyday.
She gave a talk at the Y. I was teaching some fitness classes and swimming at the Y at the time, and had started their own yoga class. And she came and gave a talk. And when I heard her talk about yoga philosophy, I thought I'd never heard so much common sense in my life. and I wanted to know more. So after a week or a few weeks, I went to her ashram and studied and took some courses, and an Indian yogi was there. And her tradition of yoga is the Shivananda tradition. Shivananda, who's a great guru in India, was her guru. And so she had another Swami from his ashram to give this course on yoga. And again, it was incredible. It just answered so many of my questions that I hadn't even been able to put into words. And it was a period, I'd been to some encounter groups, and it was because I was so restless, I even considered going back to England. And then there was the problem because children liked it here, and where they would go. And of course, they probably would have gone with me at the time. And
Which would have been a great loss.
So I went to these encounter groups, and they made me look at a lot of things I needed to look at, and some that were hard to look at. But they didn't give any directions about what next. Opened up, and then what next. So I started a yoga class at the Y, again out of curiosity, after meeting a woman in the shower at the Y. Oh, this is a shaggy yoga story. I met a woman in the shower who was from New York. So, you know, I was from London, she was from New York. We come from major cities and we're trying to survive in Victoria. And we chatted, and she was doing a yoga class, which had just started at the Y. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I joined her, and she's still one of my colleagues.
Yeah, she
to
was.
this day.
Yeah, she was a faculty advisor for me for my graduate studies. And
So we started to study yoga. We went to Yashoda Ashram, which is in Kootenay Bay on Kootenay Lake. Beautiful property. And my husband became interested in it. He watched me. Actually, his catalyst for starting yoga was he hurt his back. Kicking a beach ball with our children, he hurt his back. And he'd been, you know, quite an athlete. And this was a big shock to him to have a back problem. And he saw me practicing yoga and thought that would be good for his back. And now he's 91 and doesn't have a back problem.
yeah,
So it's, I can't recommend it more. So we both started studying yoga more, practicing yoga more, going to the ashram. And there we made a contact with BKS Iyengar in India through a teacher who came to that ashram.
visual aids. There's Iyengar.
Yeah. So, and one of the significant things about Mr. Iyengar, I wouldn't be in his high, probably in his biography, but was he came to this house in Metchosin and stayed with us one year.
Yeah, and wandered around Tower Point Park,
Yeah.
causing quite a, to do.
And something I wanted to make sure that I said today is that when he left here, he was with us for three or 4 days. And when he left and he was going to Edmonton, and I was going to accompany him. I was flying with him to Edmonton. And he stood on the steps and spoke to my husband and I and said to them, "You live in a very special place. You should not leave here." So
Wow.
I remember that the other day and thought, I must say that, because he sensed something, and he sensed it so strongly that his daughter came here some years later, who was a very eminent teacher, Gita Iyengar, and she stayed a week with us because she wanted a rest before she did some conferences, and she stayed a week because Guruji, as we call him, her father, had recommended this place so highly to her. So she came here, she had a rest, and we practiced yoga together in my yoga room.
Which used to be our playroom. It was taken over. Not that we resent that at all.
And she loved it too, and she kept telling us that Guruji had spoken to her so much about this place. And she didn't want to go out much, and she didn't want to meet up with lots of people who'd be questioning her and about touching her feet in the whole traditional thing. She just wanted rest and peace and time to practice. So one day I persuaded her to go for a walk down to the little park at Tower Point. And I said to Gishiji, nobody knows you out here, so it'll be quite safe. We're just going to the little beach and near the ocean. And we walked into the park, and there's about 3 or 4 of us with her. And we get to the path on Tower Point Park, just past the entrance. And somebody's coming towards us on the path, a young family, a man, a woman, and a child. And as they get up close, the woman, who I didn't know, didn't recognize, but turned to Gita, put her hands like this and said, Namaste, Gita-ji. So I thought, my God, so even somebody knows her here in Metchosin. And so she too recommended Metchosin to everybody. So I thought, since you're all living here, you might like to know that. Do you have any questions about all I said so far? There's so much. It's 90 years, you see, rather a long life.
Well, I can share a little anecdote about some of that time as a teenager. Whilst they're going to this ashram that they went once for 3 months, both mom and dad, and we were left with a babysitter, and we weren't. I in particular wasn't happy about this. I was getting teased at school about my parents being Hare Krishnas, and had a hard time explaining where they had gone. But in the tradition of parents going away, we threw a party or two, and Mom had said to me on her needing to go to do this work that it would make her a better mother, and that Swami Radha had stressed, because she was reluctant to go and leave kids and stuff, that you have to, like the oxygen mask on the plane, you have to get your own self sorted out before you can help others. And so I'm 15 and she's going off to be a better person. And they come back after their 3 months, which was challenging, 3 kids and a sitter. And I mean, he was all 19 years old. So it was an interesting time. And I think Mom probably all of 10 minutes to settle back in. And I announced in classic 15-year-old parlance, "You're not a better mother, you're worse." Helping her along with her transition back into the path of the household.
That transition was difficult, always beyond my belief, because we drove up the driveway. My husband had come with me for 3 months on this course. I was going on my own, so he was going to stay with the children, and then he decided he needed it too, so to become a better person. And so he came, and we drove up the driveway, and there was a smell. I wound the window down and said to Derek, "This smells like sewage." And when we got here, we discovered our septic tank was overflowing. So that was slightly symbolic of the return and what happened to us. And those of you who studied yoga and mindfulness and those things know how interesting the symbolism is of one's life. And so there was a lot. It did start the work. It did give both of us a direction for this work, this journey. But it was difficult. It was very, very challenging. Very challenging. And,
however, that being said, I mean, I did get involved in yoga myself because I saw that it was helping them, and I have tricky knees even when I was young, and my mom had kept saying, "Oh, yoga will help, and I'm like and I just kept ignoring it. And then finally I went and joined her class at the Y with an assortment of characters, and lo and behold, it did help, and it's helped me remain very athletic in spite of a couple of tricky knees. So and I also took some courses with what reviled Swami Radha, as I thought of her as a teenager, in my 20s, when I was in a time of turmoil and change, and it was very helpful for providing direction in my own life. So,
and my other daughter also does yoga.
Yeah.
And my son, I don't actually know if he does yoga, but he gets people in to teach yoga. He's a teacher at St. Michael's, and he gets people in to teach his students. And so but he doesn't admit to me that he actually does it. So.
He would call it physiotherapy instead.
And I didn't intend to teach when I started yoga. I was teaching by this time that I went to the ashram, but I didn't intend to teach. But there were no teachers except 2 English people who lived in India. They were the teachers in town. And they, people wanted more classes. And so they trained very quickly, the first training, a few of us to teach classes. And so when I began teaching, very quickly I learned I didn't know much about this and I needed to learn more. And that's why one of the reasons I went to the ashram, and the other because, I had turned my life upside down and I wanted some help leveling things out a bit and to carry on. So I became a teacher, knowing very, very little, but I did follow it up by going and learning about yoga. And one of the things Swami Radha told us at the ashram, they called it a yoga teacher's course, first of all. But she said, I'm going to change the name to yoga development course because nobody knows anything about yoga. So this was the real beginning by learning about the philosophy, the background, the purpose, and the practice. And it was at this ashram one Christmas, I met a teacher who studied with Mr. Iyengar in India, and I thought hers was the best teaching of yoga asana, particularly, that I'd ever experienced. And so I wanted to go to India and learn from him, learn directly, which I did.
Many, many times.
Many times, yeah.
But the first time my sister and I threw a really big bang up party when they went with a punk band in the yoga room. And much to the chagrin of our neighbors, the Mellors, where Charles now lives. So it took us a while to get on board with these things.
I can see a name on the thing about Chris Pratt. He was one of my students here. I didn't intend to teach, as I say, but I did teach. And the irony is I was going to be a school teacher when I was in England, and I got through to the level of doing some practicums, and I hated it. I didn't hate teaching, but I hated the staff at the school where I was teaching. It was in a very poor part of London, and the staff treated the children as if they were all stupid. And they weren't stupid, they were very, very smart, but very uneducated. So I thought to myself, I don't want to spend my life in this world. And that's why I didn't teach school at all. So I did become a teacher, and it was obviously my destiny. And I had just started to teach a class at the Y when we moved to Metchosin, which was, strange because I lived in a square mort and gone to the Y, and then I started teaching there, and then moved further out of town. So it was just one class, and I was still studying. And then it grew because there's a sudden boom in popularity, not like today, but an interest in Eastern philosophy, Eastern teaching, the studies of people like Laurie mentioned she studied Krishnamurti and his writing and the writing of philosophers from the East. And and also European ones like Jung, that I read a lot, and finding out more and trying to fit all these pieces together into some sort of purpose and path. And so it happened. And I used to go into town and teach the Y, and they trusted me enough because I'd been there for years on the fitness side, and they trusted me enough to let me start this yoga program, which we ran there. A group of us ran it for 10 years at the Y.
As a non-profit,
yes.
Too. It was a non-profit.
And so then we decided we'd like our own place, and we did start a center on 4th Street, which is still there today.
Yeah, where I attend a weekly yoga class.
And I'm still in touch with the teachers there, and some of them are my best friends, in fact. And the one I met in the shower at the Y is still a very good friend. And but I don't teach classes there. Now my yoga is personal for me, my practice. And at the beginning, Laurie had asked me if I would still practice, and I do every day. And in fact, Rachel will testify that if she meets me and I haven't practiced, she says, go and do your practice.
Yes, we sort of have a tacit understanding. Mom's not a morning person. That we're not going to have any conversations about anything until after her pranayama. Because it's going to be a completely different conversation.
The world changes. And I mean, it keeps me physically going. You know, it's challenging. There are challenges for me in my body.
And what would your daily practice be? Would it be start with breath work and then yoga and then meditate, or is it?
It varies, Laurie, according to, I go down and I almost always start with some work on my feet, because you have to plant your feet firmly on the ground to achieve anything. And this is a problem when you get old, as you probably all know or have heard about. So, and I have tricky feet because I have a bunion that I've had all my life. And it doesn't hurt, there's no pain, but balance. So I work on my feet every day. And in that moment, I tune into my body and decide what is needed. And sometimes it's mostly breath. I don't have a lot of time, which sounds ironic at 90 years old, but my husband's not very well at the moment. And so I can't spend hours down there in this yoga space. So I do this footwork and then maybe breathing and a few physical stretches, maybe more. This last little while this week, I've been doing a lot for my upper body, my shoulders, because I had some shoulder pains. I had a lot on my shoulders and they were protesting. So that's been a focus. Sometimes it would be more legs, feet, buttocks, but always the spine and always overall, and always breath is part of it. So this is the blessing of having studied yoga for so many years. I can be honest with myself and my body and what's needed, and then pursue that. So,
Thank you.
perhaps, instead of me just going on and on, we could have.
I have another question. So because yoga is such it's a huge philosophy, and I just wonder how you describe it to people simply, because most people just think of it as stretching or exercise, but it's just so much more than that.
That's recent, that really, when I started in the 70s, people thought about it as Hare Krishna and chanting and banging drums and wearing orange robes and that sort of thing. And then gradually it became more and more a focus on the physical. And sometimes that's all people know about it, and you'll see somebody, and I don't know if you can see how much of my body, but they stretch their arm up and they do like this, and then it's yoga, or they do this, and that means I'm doing a quiet practice. That's the sort of superficial things. And people I mentioned yesterday, I think they're teaching yoga on surfboards and gimmicks and things like that to make it known. Well, not that you couldn't do yoga if you were very adept on a surfboard, but the purpose of it is to be able to do it all day, every day in your life. And that's a challenge enough for me, believe me. And sometimes I joke with my husband, who still has a sense of humor sometimes, and he will say, I think I'm having to live this long because I've still got so much to learn about this. And every day, learning. And it's taken me in all sorts of directions, back to Greek philosophy, which I'd studied in my youth, very disinterested in it, but done the minimums, and many things. The history of my nation, England, and the colonial history and other things that were not widely taught at English schools when I was there. So I'm rounding out my education. I'm keeping my body going, and that's my life, I guess.
Thank you. There may be other people who have questions. Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type something in the chat and I can read it.
And I don't know if I become a real Canadian, you know, because I was going to, but my family in England think I sound Canadian.
Yeah. No.
I have a question. It's Mejiain here. And I was just wondering, I've got some foot problems myself. And I was just wondering, when people go out to Tower Point, they go to the beach, or they spend time on the sand. Do you think that just walking on the sand, even if you're not doing yoga every day, is a helpful thing for keeping your feet active and functional?
Absolutely, I do. I think it's wonderful. I mean, this something resource we have is the beach. I have a picture somewhere in our photograph album of myself with Iyengar down at Tower Point Park. When he stayed here, we did go down to the park, and he stood on a rock and breathed the Pacific fresh air. And if you've been to India, some of you may have been to India.
You do yoga, Patrick?
Sorry?
No, just standing, just standing.
This is a teacher in Metchosin. She's 90.
We've got Sarah.
Sorry.
It's Grace. I have a comment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I'll mute myself.
There, she's muted now.
Oh,
Okay, so we're getting. Yeah,
Okay. So I lost.
So you were talking about Iyengar being on the rocks at Tower Point,
Oh, that's
breathing in
right.
the fresh
He-
air in
he's-
Tower Point.
And you know, we're chatting, and we're chatting about life, because to him there wasn't a separation between yoga and life. Life, everything in life can be viewed from philosophical, yogic viewpoints, practical viewpoints. And so I had asked him a question about my feet, bunion in my feet, because I guess it was bothering me that day. I don't remember that, but I ended up taking off my shoes, standing on the rock, having a rather large rock thrust between my toes to move that big toe, and he's standing there, and then he turned to me and said, "This is incredible, this air, because you know, after breathing the polluted air of India, this was such a treat to him." So.
Mhm.
And we did have some retreats actually at our house, and yoga retreats, and in the park down there. We went down to the park and did pranayama in the park. So I think this is a resource. You know, we're reading a lot about the Earth's resources at the moment, the strain on them. And this is a resource that all of us have here in Metchosin. We have this space, this air, this soil. You know, to an Indian, the soil here would be so rich and lovely. And many of you are using it. Rachel's using it. And we are very glad she came back here, because Derek and I didn't really want to move from here. Well, he definitely didn't want to move.
His statement was, "I'm leaving feet first in a pine box."
Cardboard box.
Cardboard box, that's right, to be environmentally sensitive.
But I was looking at condos in town, because we were unable to maintain this place. You know, we have just under 2 acres, and it was very neglected. So I was looking at condos, and Derek wouldn't come with me. And
So I did. I
Rachel
took it.
came with me, and we looked at some. But I wasn't excited by this. You know, it just seemed it was a step that might be necessary. And when I came home one day after taking Derek, he came once. I managed to persuade him to come up once and look. And that's when he made his statement about being carried out here. Feet first, cardboard box. And so I just dropped the condo thing for a little while, but I was still looking at the back of my mind, thinking about this. And then one day, Rachel and Carlos, her husband, came and said they had an offer they wanted to make. An offer we couldn't.
So, and I had always wanted to get back here. So, and my life led me elsewhere. My husband got a job before I graduated. And so we settled in Vancouver, and then the kids were there, and they didn't, of course, didn't want to leave. And then I had my career as well, which was most enjoyable. And but I thoughts were I was starting to come over to deal with different things. Mom had broken her arm once and even her kneecap whilst teaching a yoga assessment in Montreal. And so I'm teaching full-time, working at the hospital, and then coming over here to assist. It was challenging. So that got me thinking of what that's going to look like going forward. And I realized I couldn't support them from where I was, but I was also clear that I wasn't going to give up my life in Vancouver to not have an investment here. And so we worked it out. And my husband, being from a big South American family, is very supportive of family. And he likes projects to do. So he's an engineer, so this place keeps him busy with that. And so we made them an offer, and we purchased the house from them, and then we duplexed it. And then
we thought about it for quite a long time, all of us. And then also I wanted to mention that we read a book called Being Mortal by a man called Atal Gawande. I think it's spelled Gawande. And he is he's still alive. I looked him up last night. He a doctor of East Indian heritage, a son of two doctors, who has an extended family in India. And as his parents started to age, he began to look around in the United States and didn't like the way the elderly were treated in, and the facilities to look after them, all the things, compared to India, where they would never let old people sort of be struggling on their own, not hearing from anybody. So, but also he is an American, so he knew, there's a different system there, different culture. But he started to look into care homes and things in the States, and again was appalled at the whole thing, and wrote this book called Being Mortal. And Rachel's daughter, my granddaughter, who is a physician herself, was the one who actually recommended this to us. And she recommended it, and we all read it. And I really recommend it, to read this, because it makes you question our way of dealing with it in Canada, which, and we've learned a lot about that because of the pandemic. And so that was part of it that began to make me think of what alternatives are there. And then this one presented itself. So,
and I have worked also when I was a student, nursing student, in the extended care system. So I know exactly what it was about. And I had serendipitously moved over here just before the pandemic hit, which was just a real blessing. The timing couldn't have been better. So I was committed to helping them stay here as long as possible.
So we built on. So we have two independent residences and agreements, and
so
it was a difficult decision, but it was well worthwhile. And of course, with the pandemic, I couldn't every day. My husband and I have a bedroom with a 180-degree view of the ocean, and
and the Olympic Mountains, it might even be a bit more. It's just like
it's to wake up, and our routine at the moment is I make a cup of tea, still English enough for that, although I do drink coffee a lot. But I make a cup of tea and take it up, and my husband and I sit up in bed and look out the window, and every day, and you couldn't wish for a better start, really.
And part of my physiotherapy program for them is stairs. So one of the things we did do, though, is when we built on the new suite, is we've made it all mobility friendly. So it's all one level. There's no stairs into the entrance. You can turn wheelchairs around in the shower and in the kitchen. So we were thinking of those things. The patio is on the same level, so that if we need to switch sides, because they can't manage stairs anymore for whatever reason, we can do that. And, I pick up my newspaper in the morning at the end of the long driveway, but not theirs. So it requires my dad to go down the driveway and get it. And people think maybe I'm mean. And if it's snowy, I'll bring it up. But so it's worked out fairly well.
It has.
Yeah,
it has. And I must just tell you something. Rachel mentioned I broke my knee. I broke my patella, my kneecap in Montreal when I went there actually to examine yoga teachers. I didn't break it doing yoga. I broke it walking up a staircase. And if you've been to Montreal, you know downtown they have these 3 or 4 story houses with very steep staircases. And I had entered this yoga studio. It was on the 4th floor, or I'd entered the building. And I was talking to a friend of mine from Calgary about where we were going to have dinner that night, because we were in Montreal and there were so many good restaurants to choose from. And I wasn't paying any attention to the staircase. And so I had one of those moments of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are there some questions? I see there's a few things in the chat, or?
Well, we did, Charles, thank you. He put a link in the chat to that Being Mortal.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect.
yes.
The ebook or the book. Yes. So thank you for that, Charles Krusakov. Yeah.
Even us youngsters have read the book, so we're getting ahead of the game, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you're lucky, it will happen.
Well, Frances mentioned that she's, or maybe it was you, one of you said that you keep pointing out to your children that the model next door is the one that you would like them to adopt for the future.
Well, it's interesting on that subject, because we've been talking here at the center and with our board about doing a session that is all on how you can start preparing your home for aging and things that you would want to consider. And so we will be in touch with you about that.
We've done it, even things like there was a banister going down these basement stairs to the yoga room where she goes every day, but it was put in such a way that you had to sort of lean over the top 2 stairs before you could grab it. And so it's like, no. So my husband has put in another one where they can just grab it, and we've got dual banisters on the other stairs going up, just, you know, there's lots.
So we still manage 3 stories.
Yeah, they're still going up and down stairs, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mindfully.
Yes, very mindfully.
You know, I thought it was interesting, Shirley, you had mentioned how Iyengar had said, you know, what a special place this was. And then just down the road, J. Krishnamurti, also a world-renowned teacher, sets up a school in Metchosin. I mean, for such a small rural community to have 2 renowned spiritual teachers find that, you know, I think that's very noteworthy.
Well, and the other one, I remember Swami Radha, Mom telling me that what Swami Radha said, which was her other teacher, who has also stayed here, was that with the space, that you need to share it too. Like when you're blessed with the space we have, you know, that it's important to make it available. So they have over the years shared this house with all sorts of people who have needed somewhere to land after a divorce, or my grandmother lived here for 17 years with them in what is now part of mine and my husband's place. And now we're back here. And so it has always been shared.
Yeah,
in that way.
It's
too.
a well-used house.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Is there anybody else that Chris Pratt, I'd love to hear from you as being one of her students, who's probably around your age, isn't he?
Yes.
He is, and he started in this house. I used to teach a few classes here, not many, but a few. And Chris started with me in my basement yoga room.
Wow.
I don't know whether I'm switched on or not.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Well, I do give Shirley credit for launching me on a long practice of yoga, and I enjoyed very much not only the physical but also the mental lead that she was able to give her students, and I'm most grateful for that. She looked at me rather quizzically when in my middle 70s I came to the door to ask whether I could be straightened up or not. Shirley, you did your best very much.
Well, you kept going, Chris, so it worked.
But I would also say that Metchosin truly is a special place, and your situation and mine, with the straights out in front and the connections. I think we are well gifted here, and I hope we'll continue to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Shirley.
Yeah. Chris has a hand up.
Yeah, Chris has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris. I've invited you to unmute yourself if that helps.
Well,
Oh, there's
I
two
hope you
Chris's.
got-
The other Chris, there's
The
another
other Chris.
Chris.
Can you hear me? Lori?
Yes, we can hear
I
you,
know
Chris.
that voice.
Um, I do have a question. For someone in their 70s who has been advised to get into yoga for way too many decades, and by the way, we were neighbors on Olympic View, or almost, for
Yeah, the old
way
days.
back when.
Yes.
Yeah, Chris.
I assume it's never too late, but
Never too late.
It's never too late. Never too late.
how would you suggest getting started? There's no way I would just pick up a book and try and mess around with it alone. Can you make a recommendation, or?
Well, are you still driving?
Yes.
Yes, so you can, because that's sometimes an issue out here. But
Yeah.
there are two teachers of the cut method I teach in this area.
Oh,
One is Suzanne, who Charles is taking.
Yes, Suzanne
classes with.
Tremblay on Duke Road.
And the other is up in Royal Bay, the higher part of Royal Bay above the gravel pits, and her name is Marilyn Shepherd, and she and both of them. Suzanne has been to India. I'm not sure she's been to Iyengar Institute in India, but I know she's been to India. Marilyn has, and studied with a very good teacher in Alberta, and is now here.
okay.
So there's a choice in this area, because a lot of people teach yoga and not well trained. So
Yes, precisely.
Yeah, the Iyengar method takes 3 years of training before you can call yourself a
Wow.
introductory teacher.
yeah, and there's limits on what you teach,
Yeah.
so that you don't injure people
And they have to be assessed if they want to move up. And so someone's, they have a mentor who's monitoring them. So it's very professional as a nurse who is also a member of a professional body. It's,
Very good.
one of
Well,
the people that do that.
sorry. Rachel and I connect on a number of levels, so I will take advantage of that to get some names and
Yes.
whatever. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and perhaps, because I've been looking too to find, especially a teacher, a yoga teacher that for older adults, right? Because these
Yes.
classes where it's all ages, I find sometimes it's not great for people with, who are older. And if you can ever recommend a class, if there is one that is more focused for older adults, I'd really like to be able to promote that.
Yeah, good point, Lori. Thank you.
Yes, well, so in town at the Iyengar Center there, we have very good teacher who teaches what we call usually special needs, because the needs can be at a younger age, not just old age. And she was an occupational therapist by profession, so she's very, very good.
Yeah, that's Ann Kilbertus. And I try to get to her Thursday class when I can. That's the one Suzanne Tremblay goes to herself. And that's not the special needs class. That's just one of the classes she teaches, but they do have the special needs class, and she's great.
So
Well, it's getting to 2:00, so maybe I'll ask once more if there's any questions before we end this session. Anybody else out there have any comments or questions or anecdotes for Shirley and Rachel?
Hi,
There's a
Laurie.
word of thanks, that's the main thing.
Sorry, Chris?
I say just a very genuine thank you to Shirley for what she has given to us all.
Thank you, Chris. And I think I heard Helen down there. Maybe not.
I think Sarah might have been trying to
Oh,
say.
it was Sarah.
Maybe goodbye or.
Yes, you've answered my questions, so thank you very much.
and as for being too old, Iyengar taught until
Yeah.
he was 96 6.
something, yeah.
Now, he had a lot of helpers, and sometimes when I'm in my yoga room doing my practice, I wish I had a few helpers so I didn't have to get up and get another something for my knee or something for whatever. But
Well, as you get more decrepit out, maybe we can help out.
Well, thank you so much, Shirley and Rachel. It was such an interesting conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your lives, and
Well,
it's quite remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, this was lots of fun.
well, it's been, and still is a full life.
Mhm.
Yes, it's not. Yes, you're right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, thank you again. And thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. If you have any comments or feedback, please reach out to me at the center. I'd love to hear from you. Meanwhile, I will be posting this video to our YouTube channel for you to share or watch again or share with people who couldn't make it today. So thank you again, Shirley and Rachel.
Yeah, well, our pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah, it really was. So.
Thank you.